want to say the last time we had a balanced budget in this country, Mark, was 2020. Does that sound?
You know what?
I'm sorry, 2000.
That sounds more like
yeah, 2000. Yeah. And 9/11 happened, and man, it's been a rough one ever since then. Today, we're going to talk about a report that was done. The name of it is the COVID Aid Waste Compendium. There was $872.5 billion that went to unemployment insurance programs. If just that same amount of fraud were to be, let's call it perpetrated, 3.5%, you're talking a $26 billion fraud loss at that level. What was interesting about this briefing, Mark, is the investigators said they expected the fraud to be between 10 and 30%. $250 billion in fraud is what I was told by OIG, Department of Labor, they were anticipating after this thing kicked off. Just some of the highlights from this before we get into the weeds on it, Mark. Congress appropriated $4.68 trillion to address COVID issues. And hey, I can remember back Vice President Pence saying the plan was to close down the country. I don't know if you remember this saying, Mark, at that time, but we made a lot of fun of it in my office. It was 2 weeks to stop the spread. We're going to shut down for 2 weeks. And he kept saying, it was the tagline to almost everything, 2 weeks to stop the spread. That's all we need. Obviously, that was a crock. And the solution, unfortunately, I think the government came up with was to throw money at it. Now, that's a whole different topic. And I think sometimes, Mark, politicians feel like they have to show they're doing something. And how do they do that? They do that by just appropriating huge amounts of money. Who did more? Well, I appropriated $50 billion, and the guy next to him, I appropriated $60 billion. So I did more for you. And it really gets out of control when you start to look at the waste, where the money was wasted, where it could have went to be more effective, and everything else. So here's where this organization, American Transparency, says the waste was. They estimated the fraud at $400 billion, okay? They said there was $100 billion in fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program funding. There was $200 billion in stolen unemployment aid, and there was $80 billion in economic disaster loans that were fraudulent. And some of the couple strange things that were in this, of the PPP loans, now don't forget, the PPP was something that was administered or supposed to be administered by the Small Business Administration. The premise of it was supposed to help small business in this country. And according to this report, some of the largest accounting and law firms in the United States qualified for this and took this money. The other thing was, of the $888 billion that this organization says went to unemployment aid, and that was through July of 23, 191 to 400 billion, which is on either end, it's a huge amount of money, was stolen by criminals and con artists from, quote, around the world. So here's why that's especially painful. It's bad enough that this money is being stolen, right? That it's not going to the intended recipients. It's bad enough that it's criminal groups doing this, but guess what? This is the United States funding the economy of a foreign country, because those criminal proceeds aren't even being spent in the United States. At the very least, if you're going to rob from us, please spend the money here in the United States so it can benefit our economy. But in this case, it was foreign criminals stealing the money and taking it overseas. Another thing that struck me as being especially offensive, stimulus checks to dead people, Mark, $3.6 billion. That's more than 13% of all the stimulus check payments made went to dead people. Now, I know you looked at some of the top takeaways from this report, Mark. Were there other things in there that you saw that troubled you? Or talk to me about what your thoughts are, seeing now, looking back, how the government rushed to put this money out without the proper controls in place and what happened as a result.